Good evening. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight on this blustery evening. My name is Danielle Duffy from the Jackson County Public Library. And we'd like to welcome you here tonight. It's always a wonderful day when we get to work in conjunction with City Lights Bookstore and our wonderful local authors. I'd like to bring Ms. Marsha Lee up, the Dove, to introduce Mr. Tom Baker.
I don't think I'll ever learn to not suggest something to another person or ask them what they're going to do, because the next thing I know, I'm doing it. I was asking about who was going to do the introduction. So I can officially say, I think now, that the two leaders of City Lights Bookstore are also the two leading introverts in the county, at least, which you would not accuse of the hawk or the dove of. So I do know Tom Baker pretty well. I want to introduce him. I first met Tom as an athlete. Tom is an outdoor adventure racer. He bicycles, he hikes, he does everything on a bicycle, even when I ask him not to, for the long distances and crazy things. He's done adventure racing, triathlons. He's done recently events that involve supporting veterans and their families that have to do with that combines his athletic interest. He's a leader among veterans in this county. Tom is, as most of you know, who know him, he's a Vietnam veteran and leads the Jackson County Veterans Organization. He has also been very helpful with the WCU Veteran Student Organization and also at Southeastern Community College. He's the father of Craig Baker, who is here tonight, and his daughter Pam, who is in Mount Pleasant, probably trying to listen in via some technology I don't know anything about. And I became his married dove in 2003. And it's been an incredibly, that sounds so hokey, it's been an incredibly wonderful journey. I can't even begin to tell you. You'll have to meet us for drinks afterwards at the Paper Mill Lounge, which we invite everybody to do. But please welcome the author of The Hawk and Dove.
Wow. You humble me being out here tonight. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. This is my first rodeo, and I hope to not foul it up too much, but one of the many things I want to do along this line is to start thanking some people. And the first person on my list is my beautiful peace hippie wife, Marsha Lee. Without her help and encouragement, the Hawk and Dove wouldn't exist, and I don't know that I'd even exist right now. So thank you, sweetheart. Another person that I wanted to thank profusely is a guy that used to teach at Western by the name of Alan Ray. He was my first editor. I'd been working on a novel probably 5 years and thought I had that thing down pat and just perfect, and gave it to him, and he took it home, and about a week later we met at O'Malley's and had a couple of beers, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Just how much damn work do you want to do on this novel?" Not exactly what I needed to hear. So I said, well, let's get it done. And I did. I buckled down for many reasons that I'll get into in a minute, but I've got it out. Now I want to thank Page Publishing for having faith in me and my editor, my author guide, a kid with the name of Randy Saka, and for leading me through the maze of trying to get published. It is, for a Neanderthal, very difficult. It takes a lot of that word, starts with a P, patience, of which I don't have much, and so he helped me a lot. There are a few people that read some of the early parts of the novel. I mean, it took me 10 years, and I was feeding it out to people to get their opinion. One of them was a co-worker by the name of Steve McClure. The other one was a good friend of mine by the name of Dickie Woodard. Thank you, Dickie, for your feedback on that. We won't talk about the snide remarks, you know. And the other one was my doctor, Dr. Cliff Malt. And even though he's in the Air Force, he had some good feedback on the thoughts. So thank you for that. I want to thank Ian and Chris from City Lights, you know, because without them and their help, we wouldn't be here tonight. So thank you guys. And there's another group I want to thank before I get into some more stuff. My friends that are part of Catherine Carter's North Carolina Writers Network, if I said that right. Catherine has got a group that meets once a month, writers and writer wannabes like myself, and part of that group is some great people: Gary Carden, David Waldrop, Wanda Mills, Matt, and Avram Freeman. There's many, many others that names I can't come up with right now, but thank you guys for encouraging me, helping me, and we'll read again. Now, there's been a lot of people ask me, again, since it took 10 years, you know, where'd the idea for this novel come from? And one of the first thoughts that jumped into my mind, my Sergeant Major, beautiful wife, said, don't bore the audience. So, to the sake of boring you, I'm going to tell you that one of the reasons was that from the first to the fifth grade, I couldn't read hardly anything. I struggled reading. To be called upon in class was like going before a firing squad. Don't know what it was. You almost get labeled slow. But in the sixth grade, Pauline Cowan, on top of whipping my ass a lot, helped me with my reading. And characters like Paul Bunyan and Pecos Bill kind of tweaked my imagination, and I took off from there and got heavily into war stories that my dad would put out, and so my reading definitely got better. Now, as far as the novel itself goes, there are 5 sections. 4 of them, the first 4, the Norseman, the Peninsula War, it's called Failed Diplomacy, the Civil War, which is called the Grand Parade, World War II, the Pointe du Hoc, were periods that in my reading, I become an avid reader. Something must have clicked. But almost to the point of deja vu, almost reincarnation. I just really clicked with those eras. So therefore, in my novel, they have a part. And then we get into Vietnam, and I'm going to try to keep my act together on that, but one of the major influences in writing this novel was to explain to people, not only from Vietnam, but all down through the ages, that warriors are not baby-killing psychopaths, that there are people, men and women, that get thrown into really tough, difficult situations, and most of them, not necessarily all of them, but most of them do just the best they can. And that rode on my heart for many years. The other thing was the way that we got received when we came back from Nam. And I'm going to say just a couple of pieces, and then I'm going to read from the novel. I was a door gunner the last 7 months of my tour in Nam, and their life expectancy was one of the lowest. I flew within 2 days of my DEROS. not because they made me, because I volunteered. I almost got shot down during that last 2 days. There was a young Marine that they flew out of a firefight and brought into Cameron Bay, still in his jungle fatigues. His best friend was killed. My best friend was killed. He had killed the NVA that killed his friends, and he, honest to God, still had the ears on a leather string. So I'm trying to give you an image of the mentality here, the intensity of getting on that plane. We flew out of Cameron, and about 18 hours later we're flying into Seattle. And they told us before we got off the plane that there'd be protesters. We kind of knew some of the rumors coming back, but they were guys got off the plane, kissed the ground, and then we go into the airport, and there's a wire mesh fence there, and they're cussing us and spitting on us, and that baby killer common phrase was thrown out, and you don't ever get that out of your mind. So one of the bigger parts of trying to write this novel was to tell people that soldiers most of them are just trying to do the best they can. So now, having said all of that, I'm going to try to read a piece or two in here. One of the things I want to do is read the introduction, so bear with me. It kind of ties Marcia Lee, the Dove, and I together. The Hawk and Dove is a series of tales about war and the tremendous human struggle for peace down through the ages. Come sail with the spirits of warriors past, spirits that are bound together by love and challenged by hate. Travel through 11 centuries with these people, these warriors, as they seek a seemingly simple thing, lasting peace. Listen to the spirits as they teach the armed warrior and the warrior for peace that their quests are similar. The great truth being that it takes more courage to stand empty-handed before a foe in pursuit of peace than it does to stand with weapons in hand in pursuit of war. The Spirit can teach you this if you will only listen. The warrior stands bravely in the shield wall facing cold steel, while the peace seeker stands defiantly in front of hate with no weapons. Their hearts are linked by their courage and their goals the same. To live and love in peace. So just be aware of that as I try my best to flip through and find the pages that I've marked here. The first part of the novel is the Norseman. It pertains to the Viking era, and there are three major characters. A girl that Tom Lee will meet on into past this part, and his father, who was an old warrior. This is in the year 897, and they have just begun a raid on a village in Scotland, Oban. Some of you may have been there. So let me try to read this. Tom Lee had gradually slowed his eager rush through the village and was now walking somewhat sullenly through the smoke of this man-made hell. His senses were nearly overwhelmed as his eyes darted from one side of the narrow street to the other. He watched the many burning huts belch reddish flames, spewing forth a foul stench as they burned. The pungent black smoke was like a living thing as it swirled around dead bodies and crying women, its groping tentacles choking the small children who crawled in the blood of their parents. Sparks flew about like fireflies and stung Tom Lee's eyes as he trudged towards the edge of the burning village. Gone was the youthful enthusiasm that had driven him off the ship and up towards the village only an hour earlier. Now tears rained down his cheeks. Most of the tears fell because of smoke, but some fell because of the smell of death and the cry of the dying tore at his soul. He had felt something stirring deep within him during the last raid. This was his second raid. and it was becoming clear by the moment he was not like the others in his band. Killing his first man on the previous raid had sickened him. His war band had struck a small village like this one a few days before. About an hour into the raid, an old man had rushed at Tom Lee from behind a burning hut. The old man swung his rusty sword with feeble strength, and Tom Lee had easily parried the thrust. Then, without thinking, Tom Lee had struck down hard with his sword, splitting the man's head wide open. Blood and gray matter had flown into his face and dripped from his sword hand. He stared at the blood for a long time before dropping his sword and running into the forest, vomiting in a nearby stream as he tried to wash the blood off his hands, which shook like a sick child. The old warriors hadn't seen him become sick, so when he emerged from the forest, they seemed not to notice his pale face or his shaking hand. Instead, they slapped him on the back and praised him for his entrance into the Viking warrior clan. They stood drinking mead and shouting approval while proudly watching him paint his first kill mark on his shield. He was a warrior now, but he was not proud. Ever since that day, he was terribly afraid that his father and his companions would somehow find out how sick the whole affair had made him. Now I'm going to skip a piece here and try to get into a part. Tom Lee shook the image of the old man's split skull from his mind as he worked his way through the carnage. Suddenly he stopped and stared at a particular burning hut. Strange blue flames were shooting from the doorway when out of the smoke behind the hut an old man ran at him like the ghost of the one he had killed days before. The farmer charged with a hobbled gait and guttural battle cry. Tom Lee understood enough of the Celtic tongue to know that he had been called a pig or maybe a butcher. He wasn't quite sure, but either one probably fit. The rusty sword the old man clutched in his snarled hand was aimed at Tom Lee's chest, but he swept it aside easily with his much larger sword. The old man's feet slipped as his sword was knocked sideways and he fell to his knees. Out of instinct, Tom Lee's blade struck downward, but this time he used the flat side of his sword. And the blow was not a killing one. It simply knocked the old man senseless, and he fell to the ground with a groan. The young warrior knelt down and checked the old man's pulse, proud of himself for having not killed the farmer. He rose and began to walk away. Suddenly another figure ran out of the smoke and mist, roaring like a beast. Olaf. Olaf was his uncle, a real hardcore individual. Olaf plunged his sword into the stomach of the old man who lay unconscious on the ground. The prone figure gave a death rattle and grasped with both hands the sword that pinned him to the ground like a skewed pig. Tom Lee stared in horror. After a few heartbeats, the hands relaxed and slid down the quivering blade to lie still in the sand. Without thinking, the young Viking pulled his sword and attacked with a shout. His eyes burned with fury and his sword sought flesh. Only years of battle experience saved Olaf from the same fate as the old farmer. The two swords sang an ancient song, and sparks flew into the air like fireflies. The adversaries, one an old warrior, the other young and untested, glared at each other and began moving in a wide circle. Swords remained locked in a dance as old as the sullen hills that lay off in the mist. Muscles strained and both men's arms shook in their effort. He was just an old farmer, spat Tom Lee, his blue eyes burning with hate. We spare no one except the ones fit for slaves, roared Olaf, as spittle mixed with sweat ran down the wild red beard. Tom Lee could smell his uncle's rancid breath as the big man's eyes darted around, watching closely for some kind of opening. Veins bulged in their forearms, and the two swords stayed locked in the dance while the two warriors moved in slow sideways step. One slip and the other would pounce like a wolf on his kill. I hope Odin saw your great kill, Uncle, hissed Tom Lee as he stared hard into the cold gray eyes of Olaf Moorstrong. The Norseman's god of war would welcome any fallen warrior into the feasting halls of Valhalla. The dead would be swept up from the battlefield by a beautiful Valkyrie and carried on flaming steeds to begin his death journey. I will take whatever fate the gods have for me, retorted Olaf defiantly, ever so slowly easing the pressure off his sword. There was gold to be found in the monastery, and he was wasting his time here with this stupid boy. Cautiously he lowered his death-bringer, all the while keeping a watchful eye on his brother's son. He was just an old man, nearly harmless, shouted Tom Lee at the top of his lungs. But only the dead lay around him, and they gave no reply. Tom Lee Morestrong shook his head, and sweat ran from beneath his iron-strapped leather helmet to drip off his chin. He sheathed his sword and walked around the dead farmer. His pace was slow, his boots feeling as heavy as iron balls. He passed more burning huts and crying children, his anger raging like a fire in his soul. Is this my fate? Does this make me a great warrior? Will Odin welcome me into the great halls of Valhalla for this? Tom Lee shouted his question into the morning air as he walked up the hill. Surely there is a better way for our people to get the things we need. Why must it take one man killing another in order to live? His question snaked among the shadows that danced in the mist, flames leaping as if in rebuke. So even during the Viking era, they weren't all bloodthirsty individuals. They were people trying to get by. Now, there's moving on. The second part of the novel is the Failed Diplomacy is the title of the chapter, and it's about the Peninsular War. Crawford, you and Coons hide the bodies in the cellar. Clean the floor as best you can, McKinney paused. And do it quickly, he ordered. Standing off to the side, he pondered what to do with the woman and child. They had just broken into a woman's house because the French were looking for them. They were like special ops, and they were just sneaking around in town, and they got spotted, and they had to go into this house. And the French went in, and there was a battle. And they had killed a couple of Frenchmen, and so that's why they're in there. You know the French will find these bodies sooner or later. You can't stay here, he said to the young woman. He spoke in a low voice, afraid he would wake the child who had finally gone back to sleep, but stirred slightly. I have nowhere to go, she stated flatly. Fighting back more tears, she nodded towards the French colonel, killed both my father and my husband. My mother died 2 years ago from the pox. She looked down and shook her head before going on. My father was English. He got caught up in that terrible evacuation from Madrid and was shot because he was English. Can you believe that, for simply being an Englishman? God, how can men be so cruel? Not all men are that cruel, ma'am, even during war. And this damn war will end someday. All wars do, answered McKinney, watching the dead Frenchmen being drugged unceremoniously down the steps of the cellar, their heads banging with a thud on each step. The rats will feast tonight, he thought, as he brought his eyes back to the woman. What will you do when this war ends, Mr. McKinney? Asked Elizabeth, looking into his blue eyes. I'm not sure, ma'am. Find another war, I suppose. It's the only thing I seem to be good at anymore. She looked at him for several seconds before she spoke. I doubt that very much. McKinney glanced around the room at his men. I think there will always be a need for men like me. Maybe because there will always be men like them, he said, nodding at the French colonel. Men who will take that which is not theirs. He looked at the bloodstains on the floor. Those men must be stopped. He turned his gaze towards her battered face. Men like me and those boys, he nodded at his group of green jackets, we try to stop them. Without hesitation, Elizabeth asked, why? She was intrigued by this rugged man who had invaded her house and by so doing probably saved her life. Every man has his reasons, ma'am. Some join for the sixpence and the rum that the king pays us each day. Some join to see the world or stay out of jail. And some join because they think it's the right thing to do. What is your reason, Ensign McKinney? Before McKinney could answer, Sergeant Malone shouted from the door where he and the French officer stood, "Sir, we best be moving before the frogs," that was their nickname, "miss their friends." McKinney looked down at her. "I'm not really sure anymore, ma'am." So it's another instance of how soldiers just do the best they can, and they hope they're doing the right thing. Sometimes it doesn't come out exactly that way, but most of us try. I'm going to skip that section. There's a Civil War section, and the Civil War is a difficult section to write about, but I thought, I don't know how many of you have read it, I thought I did a pretty good job explaining that not everybody were slave owners, and not everybody thought that people should be owned, but there was a young woman in that, like my wife, was very strong-willed and strong-minded, and she lets this old boy have it pretty hard. And but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. Now, there's a part here also in the Civil War. There was something about the battle, the Gettysburg battle, and Pickett's charge that always intrigued me. It was almost like I had been there. So here's a little piece of it. The artillery duel between Blue and Gray commenced shortly after 1 o'clock and continued into the afternoon. Kenneth and the remainder of the 8th Company was hunkered down in the woods as shell after shell rained down around them. Shrapnel tore through the trees, shredding leaves that fell like young snow. About an hour after constant shelling, the duel gradually slowed down. Dead men and dead horses completed a horrific carnage. Kenneth searched desperately for a Lieutenant Smith through the smoke of the bombardment. He figured the always smiling lieutenant was probably dead. As Kenneth's eyes scanned the battered woodland in search of Smith, a small drummer boy walked up to him out of the cordate haze. The boy looked to be about 13 or maybe 14, which was the average age for drummer boys, and wore a uniform that was much too large for his skinny frame. A battered old drum attached to a worn leather strap that crossed the boy's bony shoulders rested against his stomach. He looked at Kenneth's stump of an arm. Kenneth had had his arm amputated right below the elbow. The boy looked at him. "Does it hurt to get shot?" the boy asked. Kenneth looked down at the obviously frightened young boy and tried to think of something noble to say, but he simply couldn't find the words. So instead he answered as truthful as he could. "Yeah, son, it hurts like hell, but only for a little while." Kenneth paused, struggling to make sense. "But running away," he went on, "would hurt all the rest of your life." Kenneth watched the boy blink a couple of times and nervously fidget with his drum strap. "I ain't gonna run, Sergeant," replied the boy before taking a deep breath, turning and walking towards the front of the column. So even the little drummer boys were in a bad situation there. Okay, bear with me while I try to organize. Sometimes I get into the novel so much that I just struggle to keep my act together. I'll skip that section too. The next part is what I call the Pointe du Hoc. It was a part of the shoreline during D-Day that the Rangers were scheduled to attack. They not only had to scale the cliff at the base of the mountain, but they also dropped some people inland, and they were coming up into the battle from the backside. So let me get that spot here. All right, this is the beginning of that. So this was something that happened to a couple of us in jump school, and it's a little true part. Many hours later, the sun was a fiery orb as it sank slowly below the dense wall of long-leaf pines that stood sentinel above the newly constructed barracks. The ancient trees cast cool shadows across the company area, and a light breeze rustled the needles high in the tops. The pungent odor of fresh-cut lumber and fresh paint filled the air, and the buzz of mosquitoes, some seemingly the size of small birds, echoed among the wooden barracks. 250 weary paratrooper trainees stood at attention in the fading evening light as Sergeant Moore's booming voice rang from the company streets. "You people did real good today," he said as he looked at the line of tired young faces. Some smiled, but most were just too damned exhausted to reply. "Today you learned the first lesson of combat survival." His voice rose to another level. "Today you learned to help your buddy. Company dismissed." Now that piece came from our first run, the first week of jump school. Most of us were 18 and 19-year-olds, and we were doing our 5-mile runs. And this old boy, in real life he was a tech sergeant. In this, I made him a younger friend. But he was about to fall out, and if you ever fell out of a run in jump school, you were done. They'd de-roach you. So me and Bledsoe eased up beside him and helped him up and let him get his breath. And old Sergeant Moore, who I would later meet in Nam, he didn't know whether to chew us out or pat us on the back. So that had just happened, but he cut us no slack. Some of the men headed for the chow line, but some headed straight for their bunks, too tired to even eat. William Craig, a character named after my son, is one of the main characters. William found himself jogging, you never walked in the company area, alongside the soldier who had helped him carry the poor soul on the morning run. "I'm William Craig," he said, extending his big hand in the direction of the broad-shouldered private. "I'm Mike Bledsoe," came the reply, his southern accent hanging in the warm air like the smell of fresh molasses. Craig smiled when he heard the southern drawl. "Where are you from?" he asked, with only a hint of acknowledgement in his voice. The stocky, blond-haired private hesitated, slightly suspicious for a second before he answered. "I'm from Knoxville," he said with a serious, straight face. "Knoxville, Tennessee," he added, as if the town needed a further explanation. Craig could tell the guy was a little defensive about the question, so he smiled again and said with a laugh, "I'll be damned. I live just across the Smokies from you, over near Cherokee, a little place called Hillsboro." I used that name instead of Webster. Everybody seemed to know where Cherokee was, but very few people had ever heard of Hillsboro. It was just a small southern town hidden among the shadows of the great Plot Balsam. William watched as Bledsoe's stance loosened up a bit, and the big man smiled back. "Hell, I've driven through Hillsboro before. If I remember right, it sure didn't take long." He laughed and slapped Craig on the back as he headed for the chow hall. Both men stood in the long, winding chow line talking about their mutual knowledge of the Smokies when the lanky, slightly stooped guy they had helped through the morning run jogged up. The newcomer cleared his throat in what sounded like either a half laugh or an excuse me cough. "I really appreciate you guys helping me this morning. I don't think I could have finished the run without it." The Yankee accent stung their ears like fingernails scratching on a blackboard. "That's all right," said Craig, resisting a shudder, while Bledsoe nodded in agreement. "Next time it might be me that needs help." "Well," the stoop-shouldered soldier looked Craig up and down before he went on, "you're too damn big for me to carry. But I will tell you, I'll make damn sure you fall out face first, if that helps. Sergeant Moore always told us when we was running, don't you fall out of my formation. If you do, you fall out face first." So it was kind of, Eric knows that stuff. "What's your name, Yankee?" asked Craig, still laughing. I like this guy, he thought, as the line moved closer to the mess hall. Once inside, they would have to keep their mouths shut except to shovel in food. "I'm Jerry Jambardino," replied the Yankee as he extended his hand. "I'm from Buffalo," he stated proudly. "Is that in the United States?" teased Bledsoe. "Screw you, Reb. It's in New York. That's one of the states that didn't secede." The three carried their laughter through the door into the mess hall, an unforgivable sin, according to ever-watchful Sergeant Moore, whose big head turned in the direction of the laughter while his eyes glared hard. The soon-to-be victims were moving innocently along the chow line, and Moore waited patiently until all three men had gotten their plates filled by the KP food shovelers. When they were about to sit down, he walked briskly to where they stood, half crouched in an attempt to sit. His green eyes were blazing as he looked down the brim of his Smokey the Bear hat. "You scumbags seem to think everything is pretty damn funny around here. Well, let's go outside and see if you think 100 push-ups are funny. Follow me." The three men looked at each other sheepishly as Moore stomped out of the mess hall. Setting their plates down, they hustled out of the building and ran until they caught up with Moore, then obediently followed him to the sand pit. Smokey the Bear hat bobbed up and down on Moore's head as he led the three men, who now looked like scolded school children. When Moore spun around, the doomed men snapped to attention. Moore's expression grew even more sterner as he looked down at their empty hand. "Where's your damn plates?" he shouted. They looked at him dumbfounded. "Your damn chow. Go get your plates of chow now," he screamed. And Craig tore off with Bledsoe and Jambardino close behind. They grabbed their plates from the table and ran back out to stand in front of the irate Sergeant Moore. "That's better. Now put the plates down in the sand and give me a push-up." "We have to feed you, pukes, so eat." Moore stood defiantly over them while they did their push-up. Down into the food, which was cold by now, then back up, chewing. Jambardino collapsed after 70 push-ups. He never could quite do as many as we did. His face plowing down into what remained of his supper when his arms gave out. "God help us, and you want to be a paratrooper," said Moore disgustedly as he kicked sand into Jambardino's face and walked off towards the mess hall. Hoo-ah. All right. Now, this last piece is about, it's got a little bit about Vietnam, and it's got some about Rwanda. Rwanda was that country in Africa that had the Tutsis and the Hutus pretty much slaughtering each other, and it was a tough time. And I read a book once called Shaking Hands with the Devil, and it was about a Belgian colonel who had been stationed there, and how he had to deal with the troops, the UN troops, and try to keep the Hutus from killing the Tutsis. And it was a tough time, and it was sad. So I throw that in. And this piece, too, the main lead character is a female, a warrior for peace, and that's the title of it. And she had been to Nam as a nurse, and she come back, she's working for the UN. And she's thrust into a very difficult position because, number one, she was female, and number two, she was in a kill zone. So, and once again, the influence of my dove helped me create this character, and she's damn good, in my opinion. One of the three people that got out of the Jeep was a female, the recently appointed director of the Department of Peace and Stability, a newly created entity, the UN. The other two were her cameraman and his assistant. They were from the neighboring country of Ghana and spoke with a clipped British accent when they spoke at all. The director is American, Above the director's slightly gray eyebrows, sweat puddles and slowly trickles over the edge of her eyebrows. It runs down into her soft blue eyes, causing them to blink in constant motion. She knows the routine, having been in similar situations before, and her hand reaches down almost by reflex into an old AWOL bag and pulls out a neatly folded handkerchief. Pouring water from her canteen, she soaks the cloth and ties it like a bandit behind her head. She gags despite her feeble attempt to prevent the stench from making her sick. Walking tentatively, she heads down a narrow street littered with all manner of trash, her cameraman in tow. Several small, mangy dogs scatter out of her way. They're in search of food, and except for a timid growl, they pay her no attention. She puts her hands up to shade her eyes from the blazing sun as she moves through the street. Her sunglasses having been forgotten back at the UN headquarters in her rush to get here. The scene in front of her just appears to float in the still air, shimmering in and out of focus like a mirage above a dry lake bed. If it were indeed only a mirage, moans Faith Lee, who wears the title of director. The damp handkerchief doesn't help much as the stench wafts in the stagnant air on the edge of the little town square and stings her nostrils. She fights back the urge to gag as she constantly trudges forward. The town, or more accurately village, is as quiet as some long-forgotten tomb on a lonely, wind-swept ridge. A few frightened villagers peek out from mud and thatched huts as she walks by, small children standing close behind them in the doorway. As the woman and her crew move along the deserted streets, an old man emerges from the jungle that looms on the outskirts of the town like a reminder of the past. He stands, a solitary figure, on the edge of the dirt street and watches them. Village elders often whisper about this old man in their council huts. Some among them say he is a spirit. Others that he is as old as the village itself. Nobody seems to know for sure. Man or spirit, his weathered skin is the color of sun-baked asphalt, and his sightless eyes stare straight ahead, yet seem to follow the crew's every move, especially the woman's. He is naked except for a feathered ankle bracelet and a tattered loincloth the color of spilt milk. No shoes adorn his leathery feet as he limps along, a well-worn ironwood staff clutched tightly in his right hand. The twisted and slightly bent staff is decorated with bones from an unknown animal and more ancient than the man himself. The old shaman cocks his head slightly to the side as his glazed eyes follow the woman, and an ancient chant soon fills the air around him. The sound coming from his dry throat is much like that of the bones that rattle against the ironwood. His chant grows in volume as the woman walks towards the dead. She steps over a broken plastic table and rounds the corner of a dilapidated colonial-era building, its once brightly colored walls a fainted memory, and she stops. The cameraman and his assistant walk into her as she stands there with tears instead of sweat in her eyes. They peer around her and then quickly reach into their hip pocket for a handkerchief that they press to their mouths and nose. The camera, a black-bodied Nokia, continues to swirl as they slowly move forward amongst the bloated, fly-covered bodies of at least 36 dead children. The children lay in puddles of dried blood, and their numbers filled the dusty courtyard. Their tiny bodies, already swollen to twice their normal size under the brutal assault of the sun, show signs of mutilation. Death by machete is always terrible. Several adults lay among the dead, adults who thought, or had at least hoped, that they were safe in this village. The UN, in its countless statements to the world, had called this village a safe haven. But Umbuka, in northwest corner of Rwanda, was not safe. Since the middle 70s, Umbuka had been home to a small Catholic orphanage run by an old priest named Father Turlington and 3 middle-aged nuns from Belgium. All 3 lay butchered beside the children they had served. The priest had died in a similar manner, his body draped over a small child he had tried to protect. Ironically, the nurses and the priests were from the Order of Mercy, but they had obviously received none. It's always the children, always the little ones, who suffer so horribly, mumbled Faith as she walked through the macabre scene. The dead children ranged in age from about 4 to maybe 12, the upper age limit for staying in the orphanage. The front courtyard of the orphanage is eerily quiet, and only the buzzing of the flies can be heard. One slow step at a time, they walk across the courtyard and stare at the 2-story building as if it would offer an explanation for what had happened at its entrance. Hesitantly, Faith Lee and the cameraman's assistant entered the charred but mostly intact main dormitory of the brick and stucco orphanage. The cameraman stayed outside, his camera absorbing the horrific crime that had occurred there. Faith's eyes scanned the sparse utilitarian nature of the living quarters, and as they swept across the room, they stopped on one sad and pitiful sight. Most of the children, especially the smaller ones, had removed their tiny shoes and placed them neatly under their bunks before being led outside to be slaughtered. Shoes of any type were a luxury to these poor children, and the gesture was heart-wrenching. Now, I hit that part because it leads into what occurs next. It was a truthful part that occurred, and I'm not going to read the end of it. I thought about helping you a little bit here, but you just have to buy my novel and read it. It's one of those things to where there's a lot of truths in this and a lot of tough parts, but there are heroes, peace doves that save the day oftentimes. So it was trying to tell a story of soldiers and people that are thrown into those situations. And I hope I did it in a fashion that you could appreciate and understand. So there again, this is my first rodeo, so I don't know what we do from here. If you have any questions about me or the novel or what the hell I'm trying to do or anything, feel free to ask me. Do what?
You're willing for questions and answers about
Yes, right. What she said.
Tom,
Yes, Dickie.
define writer's cramp.
Writer's cramp.
I mean, is that something that you had? Seriously?
Well, one of the reasons it took me 10 years, I had a lot of cramps, you know. When you're writing a novel, there may be a few people that have got the whole ideal in their head and they just write it. And but for me, and it was one of the exciting things, the story kind of took on a life of its own. I sat down and wanted to write about those periods, but my characters came to life as things came back. Jim Berdino was a friend of mine, and he went to Nam as a second lieutenant. I couldn't find his name on the wall, but I think he survived. Bledsoe was a friend of mine, and Nam just messed him up buku, and he wound up in prison. So I tried to use characters and episodes that I had experienced or knew of, but just put it into different eras. So, but yeah, there were times when I just said, "What the hell do I do now?" So. And then sometimes it just flowed. Yeah.
Well, speaking of what the hell do I do now, what's your next project?
Well, my memoir, this really was the beginning of sort of a healing process for me. And it enabled me to start my memoir. which gets into my actual experiences, not only growing up, but primarily in Vietnam and then coming back and dealing with the demons. And my chief editor hadn't quite got it ready yet, but I've cut her pay considerably too, so she's busy trying to market this one, but hopefully the memoir will be out in the spring.
You're gonna leave me out, aren't you?
Do what, Nancy?
You're gonna leave me out.
Are you gonna leave her out?
There's some sort of spots in there that if you pay me enough money, I'll take out. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, what's something you learned about yourself by being a soldier and having that experience?
Well, that's a good question. When most of us came back from Nam, not every plane load was met like ours was, but ours was. And you don't really get over that, but you can hide it back someplace, and then you get into, going to school, trying to raise a family, start a career, until one night you're sitting around a fire and you're drinking a little bit too much and those demons come back. And I knew then when that started happening that I needed to try to deal with it. Marcia Lee helps me tremendously. I got into doing extreme sports, helped, but the ideals kept floating. So the writing of the novel and penning it down, for the first year and a half, I wrote most of the original by hand. And it just seemed to flow better for me on the pen. Of course, I watered up a lot of paper and trashed it, but I guess the main thing is that I learned is that I needed to face my demons, and that has helped me. And we work pretty diligently with our vet group. Eric's in it, Kim's in it. Dan's in it. We work a lot with the young vets, hoping that they don't have some of the problems that we had. So that part of it, I guess, has been beneficial. I mean, we're helping each other. Sherry, I'm sorry. Sitting right there. Yeah. I apologize for that.
So I have a question for you, Tom. Did it take 10 years because it was hard to face the demons?
Well, there were probably many reasons it took 10 years, like working for a living and working 2 jobs and falling in love, and but part of it was the constant rewrite. I would write a section, and then memories would come back, and I would say, I need to put this down. So, yeah, and I couldn't tell all the secrets about Nancy, and then I try to change her name, but so yeah, that was part of it. Do what, Nancy?
I won't tell either.
People wouldn't believe some of them.
No, they wouldn't.
Anybody else? Linda?
Earlier you said you had a little deja vu with these periods of time.
Well,
Is that why you selected them?
it's one of those deals to where maybe because I struggled with reading for so many years that when I finally got to where I could read and read well enough to move along in the book, characters like Paul Bunyan and Pecos Bill were there, and then I got into the Black Stallion sections because my grandfather adopted was a jockey, so the imagination flowed. And I don't think I was really reincarnated. although it's a wonderful thought. But those areas or those eras, for whatever reason, and I've read a lot about other eras, but those just resonated with me. And so I just clicked in them more. So, but yeah, after about 2 or 3 bourbons, I'll tell you more about that. But, yes.
With this being your first novel, can you talk a little bit about how you went about getting it published?
Well, it's one of those things to where there seems to be no good avenue for rookie writers. There are David Joy's a great friend of ours, and he has the connections, and even on his first one, he hit the bigger publishers. For some reason, a lot of the publishing companies like dark and like David and Ron Rash's books, they're dark and they're great, well written, but I like my heroes to win. I want them to. I don't care if they get slapped down a little bit. I want them to get up and kick some ass. So, and I really think that genre, is that the right word? Isn't looked upon as receivingly as by some of the publishers. We talked to, and God, I can't even think of the name. Some of the smaller ones around, and got no reply back, and sent stuff to them. A good friend of mine was a military writer, and he had me contact his agent, and went through that hope, and they never called me back. And so I called Page Publishing. I actually heard a advertisement about them. Now, their process is different. You actually have to pay a little bit to get into the publishing process. But for me, after having been, I guess rejected several times, that was fine. I just wanted to get the novel out there. So, but they're great people, and they created the cover and did the editing. They did call me about a week after they had the novel and said the novel is extremely well edited. Didn't say anything about the storyline or anything. Thank you. But if you've had difficulty trying to get published, I would recommend them. And what kind of deal you can work out is between you and them. But it was right. Now, my memoir, there are some other military-friendly publishers out there that might be interested. I'm going to shop it a little bit, but if need be, I'll go back to Page Publishing with them. It, I think, will resonate a lot with some of the older vets.
Tom, how painful was that editing?
How what, honey?
Painful was the editing. When Marshall Lee would come to you and say, okay, we've got to cut this baby.
Well, my spelling, sometimes the corrector spell just looks at you like, what? I have no idea. But you'll have to answer that. I thought it was pretty good, but it seemed to take her longer to correct some of it, so evidently it wasn't, it could have never been done without.
We went back and forth between, it's like, well, how do you define copy editing? How do you define proofing? How do you define editing? And then and then Tom would say things, well, like, tell me if something doesn't make sense or something like that. And then sometimes I just couldn't help myself, and I would say, I don't understand what's happening in this paragraph, And so that is going beyond the official role of what I was taught was a copy editor. A copy editor fixes grammar and punctuation and spelling and typos. So we had to figure out sometimes in different work sessions, which was I wearing? And did he want me to knock that one off and put the other one on? You know, but I want to say this about him as a writer. He was very,
Hard to describe, isn't it?
he's very clear about what he intended to say and why he made a particular word choice and why the sentences went in this order. And so if I would question it, like I don't understand what's happening in this paragraph, and he would say, well, I told you so and so and so, and I said, well, I didn't get that. And he would say, well, I meant da-da-da-da-da. And so we had to talk it out. And then he would understand sometimes and then I would understand sometimes, I didn't get that now, or I didn't understand that, whatever. So it was not about commas all the time, thank goodness. But I do, so was that, Tom, I was said, he would read it out, sometimes he would read it out loud, and I'm looking at the novel on the computer screen, and and we're going along, and I'm just correcting, the regular kind of corrections. And then I would say, what about this? Or he would say, well, this doesn't sound right. So we would kind of do a little revision together. But by golly, he stood his ground. Sometimes there were things that I thought should be, some minor revisions. But when he was clear, he was clear, and that was it.
Well, when you've been there and done that, you kind of know what you want to say, even though it may not have been literally correct, maybe, or something.
It's called stubborn. You're looking for the word stubborn.
Stubborn. It has come to mind a couple of times.
There were a lot of other words that came to mind, too.
Are some of the reactions similar to when Tomley and his uncle crossed swords? Is that kind of...
Yeah, the sparks would fly,
I never drew a saber on him, but
Yeah, but did lock my heels. Now, I will tell you, and then we'll go drink a beer or something. The one thing, I thought I could tell the story. I really did. I had lived part of it, and I had read enough to where I could get it told. The one thing that worried me was if I could do the descriptive narrative well enough. I didn't want to take 2 pages to describe the sunset, but I wanted people to see what I saw, whether it's in combat or in the setting of the sun. And I hope that I was able to do that. I think when you read it, I was kind of proud of that. So, thank you, Jeffrey.
Tom, what was your mindset when you entered the Army? What were you thinking you were going about?
Well, when you're 19, you're not really thinking anything, But
What inspired you to do?
I was young and gung-ho. I'd been raised by an old brown boot sergeant major that was just a little less gruff than Sergeant Plumley, and we were soldiers. I believed that crap about the domino effect, and I really thought I was kind of saving the world, Plus, the draft was going on, and my SAT scores were historically low. But so I went in and I joined airborne unassigned, straight infantry. I didn't want to learn a trade. I just wanted to be a warrior. And my novel is entitled "The Memoir of a Young Warrior Wannabe." So
the memoirs.
the memoir.
Did that start changing at some point during that experience?
Oh yeah, you'd be surprised after about 3 hot LZs that you lose that enthusiasm. I think most young men or women, when they first go in, are somewhat naive of what it's about. When I was growing up, I called it the John Wayne syndrome. In the movies, people are shot and they just lay down like they go to sleep. Well, that ain't the way it happens, and then you start shooting people and they come apart and you can't put that out of your mind. And So it matures you. I went over when I was 19. I came back when I was 20, but I was a hell of a lot more mature. Good, bad, or indifferent. It rips the youth right out of you. Had you known all of that before you went in, maybe you would have made a little different choice. But they ask us a lot at the Unseen Scars, would we do it again? And all of us say, yeah, we'd do it again. If the country needed us, we'd do it again. So.
The commercials you see on television make it seem like a heroic warrior.
Mhm.
Oh,
Well, they feed on that. Now, you might, as you get wiser and more combat efficient, you might realize that that's not the way you'll do your job, for God and country, but you're not the gung-ho young dumbass that you were, so. Forgive my French. I was raised by an old sergeant major, and the cuss words kind of come out. So I apologize for that. If it offends anybody, Eric. Okay. Yes, sir.
I just want to make a comment. I was going to say, from your family and your friends, how extremely proud we are of you for this journey that you've done, taking this on. We look forward to you having read the book, to reading it, and to reading your memoir, and to learning more about you. So I was going to say how proud we are of you.
Thank you. Can I go now?
Of course, at the end of the reading, there was a book signing. That means that one wishes to purchase a book, Tom is willing to sign it and personalize it to anyone who has a request for that. And also, I learned about a half hour before this event started that another thing I need to learn how to do, other than copy edit, is to be an event presenter coordinator. I don't know, Ian told me, and I went, they brought, bless their hearts, they brought cookies and cider from City Lights, and I went, oh, you mean refreshments? And that's me. It was like, yeah, you should learn how to be a dang, okay. I don't think I'm ever going to get social media under control, but anyway, so please, if you will, stay and visit, talk with Tom, have some refreshments, and then we're serious. Tom and I and anybody, we would love for you to join us. We're going over to Paper Mill Lounge and Theater, which is now I've learned to say on Back Street of downtown Silva, and where we can have whatever we wish, like adult beverages. It's just a joy to see everybody tonight. Thank you so very much.